Have you ever wondered how much of an impact you could have on other people's lives, especially in geopolitical, roleplay, and historical Minecraft? And if so, did you ever expect that something so simple as a feud could alter the history and lives of thousands of people on a Minecraft server forever? Because this is exactly what I'll be talking about today. The Northern Collective Wars, otherwise known as the Great Northern Wars, or simply Collective Wars after the Collective Alliance. This war started on the 29th of October 2023. However, many of the events leading up to this war had already started in late August, early September of the same year. This war was between the defense consisting of Republican Bardonia, Deliria Cinderia, United Crowns of Silter, Noxvyvras, Andorn and Askaru, versus the attacking parties consisting of Imperial Bardonia, Ultima, Kartek Fjellheim, Galadon, Evermore, Empire of Escheria, and the GSRO aka Charm. The struggle for Khanjii, the pre-war and pre-conflicts chapter. After the collapse of Alamein caused by the invasion of Greater Plagos, a union between Lunaris and Plagatia, a nation which has already been covered by CrazyKing's video, multiple powers struggled for control of the Rathnerian subcontinent of Khanji and subsequent reunification of Alamein, and therefore the subcontinent as a whole, the most important ones to this video being Ultima, or at the time Lefros ruled by Qui-Fi, and Cinderia ruled by Blue V2. Curiously enough, they were in lore brothers, both therefore being members of the Alernal dynasty. During this period, both nations annexed several successor states of Alamein, and later on Cinderia would unite around 66% of the subcontinent, and to legitimize there. At the time foreign claims to the lands, they would form their own puppet state called Noxvyvras. Noxvyvras, a name that derived from the Nox religion and Khanji in the Noxus tongue, which is called Vevras, was created to essentially act as a haven for all remaining Noxists post-genocide, and as a forward outpost for Cinderia to launch military operations from. However, due to major developments and high activity spikes post-vassalization, it started being seen as something else entirely, as an ally, and as a close friend. As a result of the close relationship that had developed between the leaders Green Flag and Osbert with Cinderia, and the Cinderian leader himself being part of the Daelyrian royal family, said leader would make all these nations and peoples unite into the Northern Crowns. The Northern Crowns, although not known to the public, wasn't created solely due to the friendship that the Cinderian leader shared with the founding members. It was also created because by this time, said leader had already heard about the plans of Ultima, and united the nations to delay a possible invasion and give him time to prepare for a preemptive strike. However, during the time that the Northern Crowns had united and were preparing, so was Lefros, as they would subsequently unite around 25% of the Khanji subcontinent and form Ultima, led by a great military mastermind by the name of Cosmos V2, along with player Qui-Fi. Around late August and early September 2023, both nations had grown tired of their shared occupation of the Khanji subcontinent. As a result, relations soured, and both would plot against one another in several different ways. It is uncertain who started the plotting, but it is well known that both factions knew of what their opposition was planning. Cosmos V2 and Ultima, however, would definitely make the most impact with their clever planning. They were able to dissolve several of the alliances kept by the Northern Crowns, as well as gain the support of several other nations across Rathnir. During this time, the Northern Crowns unwisely overestimated their own military capabilities, leading them to neglect preparation, thinking that Ultima would be scared off by their recent unification and that the tensions would decrease. Breaking point. A week before the war. A few days prior to the war, many people who had begun feeling terrible for the Northern Crowns and realizing the horrible and unsalvageable situation they were in, came forward and informed the Crown's leaders about the impending attack from Ultima. The Northern Crowns, feeling threatened, made a rash and terrible decision that almost cost them everything. The Emperor, Isit Blue, reached out to the Ashayan Emperor Hasufal and asked for vassalization so that they could perform a preemptive strike against Ultima. However, what Isit Blue did not know is that Ashai had a secret alliance with Ultima, and when he did find out, it was already too late. The Ashayan Emperor had already informed Ultima. Ultimatum. And so, catastrophe struck. The Northern Crowns, realizing their mistake and that they had nothing to lose, entered discussions with Ultima in a desperate bid to avoid war. Initially, Ultima had deadly demands, such as the full independence of the Cretian viceroyalty, the biggest viceroyalty within the Northern Crowns, whose leaders Fendalor and Comrade Scouty had been secretly plotting with Ultima to acquire their independence. They also demanded the full annexation of Noxvyvras, and for 5 million to be paid to Cosmos V2. The Northern Crowns considered it, but ended up giving, foolishly, counter demands. They would free Noxvyvras, also known as the Sindirian Khanjii territory, so that Ultima and Noxvyvras could engage in their own conflict. Sindiria Northern Crowns would give up 3 towns and pay a total of 6 million Rathnir dollars. Ultima accepted. However, as soon as the transferring process had been completed, the Northern Crowns were scammed, and Cosmos and therefore Ultima declared war moments later. This scam, however, ultimately turned out to be the worst mistake Ultima could make, as it would only anger the leaders of the Northern Crowns, causing the implementation of the no-surrender policies, which would be the greatest thorn in Cosmos' side for the duration of the war. After the failure of the appeasement treaty, allegations of ethnic cleansing and expulsion of thousands of Noxyvrans began to spread. Additionally, vague threats made by a high government member of Ultima hinted at possible plans of cleansing all of the Northern Crowns for living space, with rumors of planned destruction of all the subcontinent's population and cities. This, coupled with the failed treaty and scam, would lead to the legitimizing and bolstering of the no-surrender policy and help to maintain loyalty and support for the war effort amongst the nation's remaining cities. Ryllenya Battle. A success for one is a disaster for the other. Early war. Overwhelming Ultiman win. After the Northern Crowns were scammed, they thought the worst was over. Unfortunately, that would not be the case. Not long after, 3 proxy claims declared independence, and all the Crown's allies had dropped them, fearing that Cosmos V2, Ultima, and their allies would bring the war to their own nations. Ultima soon after decided to use this to their advantage, and launched a surprise attack on the Daelirian Sindirian city of Ryllenya, and hired the best merc group on the server, Aragotha, being unprepared and being given only a 24-hour warning before the war. And having 0 allies, they still attempted to fight and were able to initially hold the Ultiman force. However, their front lines would crumble and Ultima would march into the city center and capture the claim. Not even 5 minutes later, the battle had been lost in an overwhelming victory for Ultima. Soon after, a northern Delirian claim called Sovdal, which was of great importance to Deliria Sindaria, would join Ultima, and Asher would do so too. Before the Cuslandia battle, which was the most decisive battle in the conflict, the tensions had begun to rise elsewhere, in Bardonia. Bardonia, weeks before the Great Northern Collective Wars, had been in a month-long civil war, forcing the Bardonian Imperials into a corner. Leaders like Kyborg, Yu, Shanks, Kaiba, Leguds, and, most importantly, Unicorn Boy, Kapna, and Emperor Cheese dispersed across Rathnir until one refugee came out of retirement and got unbanned, his name being Kapna. Kapna, who had a reputation for being ruthless and tactless though skilled in military craft, began plotting in secret after his savings were stolen and split among his enemies. That drove him to ally with an old friend, Cosmos V2. Together, using their leverage, they used various connections and remnants of influence in Bardonia and elsewhere, and they set off a civil war in Bardonia with former imperial mayors splitting off in droves, forming the Seventh Empire of Bardonia. This empire would prove quite a challenge to the Republic as it was propped up by Ultima, as mentioned previously, leading both nations into a series of battles seeking revenge against old enemy nations whom invaded and led to the destruction of the Sixth Empire, namely Maizen and the Republic of Bardonia to the north. Due to the clumsiness and carelessness of the Collective Alliance, unfortunately, they were able to gather quite a few more enemies, until the Cuslandia battle, and despite Ultima and mainly its leader Cosmos V2 still acting quite well and playing their cards, right, unfortunately, their alliance members' behavior and desires, as well as a combination of events regarding time management, the lateness of their allies in reacting to the battle and bad logistics, would ultimately allow Uniseg 12 and Pancake Demon, both major players in Deliria Cinderia's side, mainly at the end of the war, to convince most of Aragotha to leave the war and the AWE in Sylvania to come to the Crown's aid. To this day, it is not known what they said to convince such powerful groups to side with the likely losing party at the time. This consequently resulted in a Pyrrhic victory for Deliria Cinderia in the Cuslandia battle. Agreed borders post-war, after the loss in Cuslandia due to clumsy preparation via the Collective Alliance. Ultima was going to hire Aragotha for the next battle to finally achieve their goal in taking the final Noxvyvras stronghold of Cuslandia. However, things would take a turn when it was discovered by Rathnirian scientists that Rathnir and Eldom would be frozen by a meteor in 6 months, with millions planning to flee to a new world called Abexilas. This would lead Ultima to contact their arch-nemesis Deliria Cinderia and the United Crowns of Siltor for a peace deal, as they saw no reason for fighting on a world that will end soon. The Crownlanders had thought the same thing. A peace deal was then drafted up, along with an NAP, non-aggression pact, being signed by both parties as an act of goodwill, and new borders were drawn up. The final claim transfers and border shifts occurred on March 3, 2024, when the remainder of the Northern Crowns, except several small islands, was annexed by Ultima. However, the United Crowns of Siltor refused to sign a peace and continued to fight against Ultima and their allies until the very last days of Rathnir. If you want to be part of this amazing Minecraft server, the IP is play.stoneworks.gg. And the successor to the Northern Crowns still exists to this day. They're called Vagaria and Nan, so feel free to join them.